Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome to another episode of Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Monday, November 25th, and today Grayson and I come to you to review Baylor's 20-10 victory over the Houston Cougars. Baylor's extended its winning streak to 5 games, all in Big 12 play, running its record up to 7-4 overall and 5-3 in Big 12 play. Still in the hunt for a Big 12 championship. A lot of stuff would have to be crazy, fall into place for that to happen. But this game was important because it was a game that Baylor was favored by 8 on the road. A lot of games, very close lines over that, the 5-game winning streak. But this one was one Baylor should have control of this game, and they did. Now, I think we knew that Houston's defense was going to be a challenge, but I think at the end of the day, this one came down to Baylor really keeping this one closer than it should be. I mean, you talk about the turnovers. But you also talk about the bad snap on the field goal attempt. At the goal line that led to the field goal attempt that took 4 points off the board right before halftime. Just a lot of things. Baylor just didn't play clean. I mean, the offense didn't play clean after it had been for 4 games. And I think it's kind of a good time for it to happen and to still get the win, allowed the defense to step up. Only gave up 3 defensive points for the entire game, which was, against this Houston offense, that's what you wanted to do. That's what you expected to do. You say, are we a decent defense? And if you can do that, then you're doing pretty well. But at the end of the day, Baylor's 7-4, and you signed me up for that at the beginning of the season. I'm absolutely taking it. You go into the last game of the season against Kansas with the potential to get to 8 wins. But in general, man, 5-game win streak, Big 12. I don't know when the last time that's happened. I guess it was the 2019 season that they won 5 in a row in Big 12. And this team's winning. And at the end of the day, it's all you can really talk about, because if you're not winning, who knows where the season's gone. But they're winning right now, 7-4, and we'll see if they can finish out strong now.
It's all that matters, right? They're 7-4 on the year now. This is kind of what the expectation was, I think, for people who had optimistic views of this season. Whereas, you kind of look at where they were Vegas odds wise. It was 5.5 wins. This is a big step forward for Baylor throughout this season. If they get to 8-4, that's one heck of a turnaround. And that's a kind of season where you just go, man, that's a lot of momentum building for next season, building for the transfer portal, building for your coaching staff, your players. There's a lot to be excited about by this run here. And even if they do come up short and lose to Kansas and, go to the bowl game and, if they lose there, it still is a really good year. And I don't know if Baylor fans will appreciate it as a really good year if those things happen, but it absolutely is, in my eyes at least. Now, I think an important thing, and I mentioned this on our Sikkim 365 board, but this game was not clean. But this is also the game that over the last 2.5 years, Baylor has found a way to losing games where everything doesn't go right. They're unable to find different ways to win football games. They're unable to, when the strength of their team isn't playing well, they're unable to kind of match it with the other side of the ball. And in this game, you got to think about the Baylor offense was pretty bad. I know the yards are good, but they gave up a touchdown to Houston, their only touchdown of the game. They gave up incredible field position early on in the game by that Sora Robertson interception. They put the defense in bad situations. They had a bunch of 3-and-outs. They did not perform to the level they needed to, and the defense just kept stepping up time and time again. And I think my read on this, coming into this game was Baylor's performed really well against the bad offenses on their schedule. And once again, they performed really well against a bad offense on their schedule. Does that mean this is an elite Baylor defense? Absolutely not. But when they've been given an opportunity to face a team that has inferior talent on that side of the ball, Baylor is absolutely, it hasn't even been close. The Utah game, the second half, Air Force, Tarleton State, and then this game, Those are the 4 worst offenses that they've played all year, and they crushed all 4 of those offenses.
Yeah, and I mean, truly, we could talk about the first halves of other games of struggles. Talk about the BYU game, but in so many second halves, I mean, even in the Colorado game is a great example. They gave up 7 points to Colorado until you get to the Hail Mary, you get to the overtime. That ended up being 38 points scored, where Baylor's defense played much better for that entire game. BYU game, second half, give up 3 points. Texas Tech until garbage time, 7 points. There are just so many instances of this, that capability. But you also say you got to give credit to the opposing offenses in those situations. They made adjustments. They scored points. They did what they had to do. But this is more about Baylor's defense in this particular game. And I want to make sure we stay on track with that because they did exactly what you just said. They had to do what they did. And I don't think that Dave Aranda could ask for a better setup going into this Kansas game of like, we played pretty bad overall on offense. You better get it together in this game because you're going to have to score points. Our defense really played well. The defense gained confidence, I'm sure, to an extent. I mean, you get 3 turnovers, 3 interceptions. The special teams does force another turnover. And I mean, that was as good of a solid of performance as they had. I mean, you talk about a Houston team that did score 30 against TCU, put up 17 on Utah, which Utah's been a pretty good defense. They beat Kansas State, and we know that they struggled against Arizona, but that was both for you and I both going into that game against Arizona was like, Houston's they might be the better team in this game. I would not be surprised if they win this game. Now I think they get on the road and it kind of snowballed on them. But this was a team that was playing much better than what their overall record said. Their offense was always the struggle, and Baylor did what they had to do against their offense. I mean, this was one of the lowest performing outputs from their rushing game in a while. In terms of overall, you talk about they rushed for 220 yards against TCU. They had a decent game against Kansas State. Baylor did what it had to do. I think at the end of the day, that's what they had to do, and allowed them to get a win where the defense carried them. And I think that gives you confidence about the direction of the defense to an extent. And it still has warts, right? Like they still have warts defensively, but the fact that they're playing with that type of motivation helps when your team's winning. But they did, and it was interesting. I saw Lorando Johnson quote posted me on Twitter X and mentioned that where I had mentioned that the defense carried this game after the offense had done it for so long. And Lorando came back and said, yeah, we got to keep doing this. We owe them a lot. And so that motivation's there. And I'm really curious to see how they come out against Kansas. But for terms of this particular defense against Houston, they played the run really well. They forced him into throwing the football, and they got turnovers because of it. It was good to see 3 interceptions. I mean, that's been a long time coming for this defense to get that many turnovers for Dave Aranda. And the secondary specifically, I was really happy for them. And that's 2 games in a row where that secondary's played pretty well overall.
And I personally, I think the secondary is where we should start. Now, again, this is the worst passing offense in the Big 12, one of the worst passing offenses in the nation. So I do want to put that out there before we give a ton of praise to the Baylor secondary for this performance when they've been pretty up and down and very much attacked for the last few weeks against these good offenses that they've faced. But, I think after that West Virginia game, I'm sure there were some tough conversations that had to be had. I mean, you're bringing in a walk-on and Jacob Redding coming on the field who hadn't played much all year. He comes in the game, and I'm sure that these older guys were like, we need to play better. And to see Devin Bobby and Devin Lemire have probably both of their best games of the year was really encouraging. And they both forced big turnovers. I think Devin Bobby's interception in the end zone really, I think it set the tone for the game a little bit because it felt like if Houston goes up 7-0 there might be some different confidence that they have instead of having to play from behind a lot of the game. And then, of course, Devin Lemire's iced the game at the end. So I thought that was huge. You mentioned Lorando Johnson. Man, I would say over the last 3 games, I think he's making a case that he might actually be their best defensive player. He's been graded very highly in a bunch of these games. I feel like, as crazy as it sounds, I feel like teams are trying to target Caden Jenkins far more than Lorando in some of these games. And then, at times they throw at him and it just feels like he's making play after play. He had the big interception in this game. he's just played really well. I've been super impressed by that. And I honestly think when Baylor got him to come back, I don't think there was there was obviously excitement. And I think we all had expectations that he could come in and play pretty well. But he's played awesome in recent weeks. I've been very impressed by him. And, he's just another guy who's making plays right in this defensive secondary. So I was very encouraged by these older guys just making plays, and you needed them to in this game, and they're going to be challenged in a very, very different way this upcoming week against Kansas. But yeah, they played really well. And again, you mentioned the defensive line, the linebackers, they set a tone up front. They were absolutely not going to get ran on all game. It was not going to happen. They weren't going to let Zion Chris run all over the place. They didn't at all. I mean, he had 10 carries for 27 yards. That's a terrible output. It felt like every time that he stepped up, they were tackling him, and it was like a 1 yard gain or back to the line. And it wasn't going as a sack, but it was a nothing type gain. And so I felt like that was huge for them as well. They really, again, set the tone, then forced Houston to have to throw the ball all over the place. That's where the secondary really stepped in and played well. So very complete performance, very impressed by the defense. We got to give them a ton of kudos because we've been talking about how much they've struggled over the course of the last few weeks. We talked to Kyler Jordan mentioning that they need to step up. Lorando mentioned it to you. I just think this is kind of one of those games where they had to take advantage of it, and they absolutely did.
Yeah, and that's 2 games in a row. And I know that West Virginia and Houston aren't the best passing offenses, but they're offenses that your defense has the opportunity to play well. And they didn't play great against West Virginia. They did give some plays where the West Virginia just went out and made plays. They do that. They have the ability to create explosive plays, but you have 2 games in a row where they're basically around 50% passing or a little bit lower. You get 4 interceptions in those 2 games. And Garrett Green going 19 of 39 passing, and then West Virginia turns around and beats up on UCF pretty good this week. So that was encouraging to see that it's kind of a string. Maybe it's hard to tell. Like, you go and face Kansas this week and it could all be undone, but I think it's a good sign. Okay. It's like, are they kind of getting over the hump? The offenses that they're facing are not as good, but there's some confidence, just like we saw with the running game early in the season. It's like, maybe it's going, maybe it's not, but then it eventually just explodes and it takes off over multiple games. And I was encouraged. I mean, you mentioned Lorando. His interception was great. I don't remember the exact timing of that interception, but it felt like, thinking back, it was a really big moment. And it's kind of, Baylor hadn't moved the ball very much offensively. Maybe the beginning of the second half, they hadn't moved it much.
6:26 left in the fourth, and it was a 7-point game. So, I mean, yeah, it was massive. And Baylor turned right around and they go 4 plays, 8 yards, kick the long field goal. But you're just like, this was we're going to talk about the offense, but the defense gave them so many chances to really just run away with this game, and they couldn't do it. And I'm not going to, harp on them too much. They've been amazing during this run. But when we do talk about them, I do think it's important to mention that they also had not just like these, you got to drive 80 yards down the field. It's like, no, they were given a ton of opportunities to just, where if they just move the ball a little bit, they might score a touchdown or just take advantage of a couple things here and there. And you might, extend this lead to 20 points, and they just couldn't do it.
Yeah, no, the defense definitely carried the day for the special teams. Did a really good job. Isaiah Hankins kicking 2, 45+ yard field goals was huge. Like, I remember when they went to kick the first one, I guess, or maybe it was the second one. I don't remember which one it was. I looked at my wife and I was like, I don't agree with this. Go for it. Like, you've been aggressive all year. It's 4th and 4, whatever the call was. And I was like, I think you go for it here. I don't know if he's going to make this. And then he drilled it. And then that's kind of been his entire career. It's like, maybe we shouldn't kick this. And then he drills one. And obviously he's had a big moments this year, but this game, special teams getting the turnover on the kickoff return and then making 2 field goals. That was kind of the name of the game, plus the defense. And where the offense needed those 2 units to help them, they did. I mean, that was huge for this particular game.
Yeah, you mentioned Hankins. I'm trying to remember, get this right. Was it his first extra point or the second one where it literally hit the post and it ended up staying in? But it was like
I
It
don't
was
even remember that one.
it was basically a shank, and then he steps up and drills these kicks. And I'm with you. The 50-yarder that he kicked in the fourth quarter, because it was 4th and 4, 4:24 left. You're just like, oh man, it really feels like if he misses this, it feels like this might be the drive that Houston is kind of
Goes and
able
ties
to
it up.
maybe go
Yeah.
score and tie it. And he drilled it. I mean, it was good
Yeah.
from 55. I mean, it
Yeah.
was awesome to see. He's made some clutch kicks this year. I know he's had some ups and downs this year as well. But it was really nice to see him on the road, step up in a big moment. And also, special teams, right? Palmer Williams was great in this game as well. Punting the ball. He had some massive punts in this game. I mean, those two were terrific. They didn't have anything huge as far as the return game goes, but those two areas were very big for Baylor.
Yeah. Josh Cameron didn't have a single return, all fair catches. Palmer Williams averaged 45 yards a punt, and he had one inside the 21 touchback, but he didn't have the long of 57.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's been kind of status quo for the entire season. He had a couple of moments, but not in this game. He did really well. Jamal Bell, he had two pretty good kickoff returns, which, it's kickoff returns are so weird now. Like because of the fair catch giving you the ball at the 25, they're so hit or miss on if you should do it or not. But he did a decent job. But where Baylor did well, Houston did not. They had the fumble. They missed a field goal early, and that was huge for Baylor because while Baylor wasn't playing perfect, neither was Houston. They're able to get out with a win. And I mean, another 10-point win. At the end of the day, like that's another 10-point win, another double-digit win. Baylor hasn't had a lot of those up until this year. And then you have 4 out of your last 5 in this winning streak have been by 10+ points. And in general, man, like I really some of these games you kind of get that vibe, like it's close. It's a 7-point game. It's a 3-point game, whatever it is. I never felt like Baylor was out of control, and that was a major credit to Baylor's defense because they were not doing anything offensively. Houston wasn't. They would kind of string together a few plays, some trick plays that they did to extend drives. I think one they ended up getting the field goal off of late, but Baylor's defense just kind of controlled the game, and they haven't done that really dating back to when the Tarleton game, Air Force game, I guess, even though that one was close, that was more on the offense as well. That was a game where the offense just turned the ball over. And we haven't seen that since then. So I never felt like Baylor was out of control, and that was a good thing, kind of game control. I don't know what the stat is for that. I know they talked about that in the college football. It's like, what was your game control? Well, that was a game where it was close. Baylor basically had control of it the entire time. And obviously Sawyer's pick 6, and I guess that's a segue into the offense and their struggles. But they just got in their way. They got in their own way the entire game. And it was a lot of it was because of Sawyer obviously having 3 interceptions. The one late, he was just trying to make a play down the field on the 4th down play, but the first 2 were awful. I don't really know what led to those. And I'm sure that we can ask Dave Aranda about that in his press conference, but it was just like a boneheaded throw. I mean, he's had a couple of those this year where it hits the defensive back in the hands on the sidelines where it would have been a tough play for the defensive back, but it was a bad throw. These weren't even easy. I mean, these weren't even tough plays. They were just right into their stomachs. And one of them obviously for a pick 6. And that just kind of set the tone for the entire game for the offense. They just didn't play clean. I thought the running game was going like in that first half, it was just 7-8 yards, 7-8 yards, 7-8 yards. And then they got into the second half. The game was still close, and they didn't have the opportunity to run it. They had 6 plays in the third quarter, maybe. And that just really took them out of a groove, and they never got it back. And like you mentioned earlier, they couldn't capitalize on the defense giving them good field position, and that was the name that basically scoring 20 points in this game. That was the reason.
Right. So I have a lot of, I guess, issues with kind of this performance for Baylor. And it really just, I mean, for me, it kind of goes to, they did things in this game that they haven't done all year. And it's not just, Sawyer's interceptions, the bad throws that he made. There's also play calling. There were just things that Spavital did that I just don't feel like they've done all year. Specifically, a couple things. That Houston has an elite cornerback. Like, I think their highest graded player on their entire team is Jeremiah Wilson. And why are you throwing at this guy? Like, when they played Colorado, they did not throw at Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
But they decided in this game they were going to start off throwing at Jeremiah Wilson, and immediately an interception. The interception on that play, to me, I know Travis Roeder tried to break this down on Twitter, and I agree. There's a lot of ways that you can read into it. It felt to me like Sawyer was expecting Hal Presley to run a slant, but it also felt to me like Jeremiah Wilson read the slant the whole way.
Yeah.
And so therefore Sawyer's making an anticipation throw and Jeremiah just jumped the route completely. And as we saw later in the game, he jumped a curl route as well and returned it for a touchdown. And so, or curl or a hitch, really, because it wasn't very far downfield, but it was just these two plays where it's like, why are you tempting arguably Houston's best player when we really haven't seen them do this? And then more to the point, Baylor had a lot of success across the middle of the field. And we talked about this last week, when we previewed this game, that feeling like the middle of the field was going to be where they needed to attack and could attack. And they did that with Michael Trigg and Ashton Hawkins. But every time they tried to throw it to the outside, it really did not work that much. They had the one throw to Ashton Hawkins that was the touchdown on the outside. But I mean, really, he wasn't even spread out wide. So
it was a protected throw. It was either a hit or a miss throw. There's not a lot of danger in that particular throw.
Right. And so I felt like, again, that went away from what they've done all year, because Spavital has done such a good job of analyzing weaknesses. And then once he sees it, you just keep attacking it. And, in this game, Michael Trigg and Ashton Hawkins were the guys that had big games. Trigg's really all of his came in the first half. But then the outside, Hal Presley and Josh Cameron struggled. And I know Josh left this game as well, but I just felt like that's where you need to attack. They didn't do it often enough. And because of that, it led to some turnovers on the outside throws that were a little disappointing. The other part is, like you mentioned, I felt like there was some overthinking in the run game. And I don't know if it was because they respected Houston's defensive front maybe a little bit too much, or if it was because the offensive line was not having their best day, which was very true. That they had a couple, guys who had one of their weaker performances of the year. Maybe that's what happened. But for them to run a wildcat with Bryson Washington when they've just been handing the ball off and running easily for yards after yards on that drive, and then you kind of overthink it a little bit by running this wildcat that they've ran a couple times and it hasn't worked. I just feel like sometimes you're trying to make something work that maybe you're just not quite ready for. And you could just hand the ball off on the one and just keep on handing it off right up the middle, like they've done pretty much all year in those type of situations. So those couple things were a little disappointing. I felt like they went away from the run a little bit too much. I felt like they didn't attack the weaknesses that were exposed by Houston. And because they didn't, it led to some very untimely plays. And of course, a play where you're giving up 7 points to a team that all you had to do was not give up points to make this a very comfortable win. But the offense gave them points.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the run game. And I think in general, like Houston didn't really shut down the run game. And that was my, and I think that third quarter kind of skews everything. There's two things. The third quarter, they didn't have the ball at all. And then they lost 25 yards on the bad snap. That goes against, I guess that went against Bryson's number. I'm looking here and I don't know who exactly got those stats off their numbers. But his numbers, Bryson's 28 for 113 for 4 yards of carry. I'm assuming it went on those. I want to pull that up in just a second. I could pull it up on the actual game. But like I think that was my biggest frustration. I was like, then I found myself even in the third quarter on the first possession when Sawyer Robertson sat twice. I was like, run the football. You for the entire first half, you ran the football well, even if it was only 4.5 yards per carry, where you've been averaging 6.5. I understand, like you feel like maybe we're not, but there was no slowing down Baylor's. Like if you ran it 3 times, Houston wasn't going to shut you down 3 times in a row, especially if you're getting 4.5 yards on the first carry. And I was really frustrated with that in terms of play calling. And then it snowballed because in the third quarter, you don't have the ball at all. They get back in the fourth quarter and they start running it and they find success again. By that point, the game is what it is. It's been an ugly game and you end up only scoring 20 points, but I didn't really understand the entirety of getting away from the running game when they did, because before that particular play of the snap over his head that was on the Wildcat formation, like you discussed, I didn't have an issue with it. I thought it probably just kind of gave something else for the center, Colton Price, to think about. It probably just added another layer to his bad snap. If it's a good snap, he probably scores, but I don't think that you had to do it. But in general, up until that point, Baylor ran the ball extremely well. I was actually as impressed with that first half performance, Baylor running the football, as I had been through the entire stretch of this 4-game winning streak, because Houston's defense has shown the ability to stop the run. And then in this game, Baylor was doing it just as well or better than anybody else, and they got away from it. And again, I know that it was the third quarter that was so, like, they literally had the ball for 6 plays, but it just felt like Baylor gave up on it when they didn't really need to, and I didn't understand that.
I agree. I agree 100%. I will say, yes, the third quarter was bad for Baylor, but it was also Baylor's own doing. I mean, they had 2 3-and-outs.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
if
no,
they
for
move the
sure.
ball, then
Yeah.
it's
Well,
fine.
and
Like,
that was what I went back to on the first. They ran it the first play of that first possession. They threw it twice, and then in the second drive where they went 3-and-out, I think they threw it all 3 times, and I might be misremembering that. But you have one rushing attempt after you ran the ball so well. I think that's where my frustration set in. You got these drives going for the first half. Sawyer's already thrown 2 interceptions, one a pick six. Let's lean on the run game. And maybe that was the approach. Like, Houston's going to make their adjustments and try to stop it. Let's adjust before they can adjust. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely could have been a part of it. Now, Baylor did get to the number they needed to get to as far as carries go. I mean, they had 47
the carries were
carries in this
numbers.
game.
Yeah.
The carries were great. I mean, they got a bunch of them. I think Bryson Washington fell on the fumble, so I don't know if he gets the negative 25 yards or whatever, or if it just goes against the team total. But that obviously skews the number a little bit. But I felt like in general, Baylor was kind of doing whatever they wanted in the run game. It felt like, I'm with you. It felt like they went away from it. It felt like there was some overthinking involved. And it could be a number of things, right? Maybe they thought the offensive line wasn't performing well enough. They were maybe what they could see was that there were more struggles than maybe we saw. But I just felt like in general, this was just a game where Baylor had the clear advantages and the clear strengths in this game. And I don't feel like they attacked them enough. You know what I mean? It just felt like, not that they were letting off the gas, but almost like they were trying to do these other things and maybe to make it more of a complete offensive performance, or maybe to, try to open up the game and open up those other options when it's like, hey, just keep going back to it. Keep attacking across the middle of the field in the pass game and keep handing the ball off. And you feel like you'll have good results. I agreed with what you said at the beginning that, Baylor was never not in control of this game. But because of how poorly the offense played at times, it made this game a little scary. And it kept being scary as you're only up by 7 points and Houston starting to find a little bit of success here and there. It did get a little scary, but again, I think this is a game where you're like, this was really good for the defense to have a game like this, to have a game where they absolutely had to get stops or you were going to lose. Yeah, and they did it time and time again. They got off field, made the plays, made the stops, and that's going to be huge as they go into this last matchup with an opportunity to get to 8-4, a chance to make the Big 12 championship game, a chance, very outside chance. They need a lot of chaos, which this past weekend we saw plenty of it. So it's very possible. But yeah, a lot riding on the line going into this last game. And I think for this defense, they need a game like this to maybe build some confidence and gain some momentum.
Yeah, it was definitely the defense's effort to keep this one a win. On that particular play, they actually gave it the numbers to team rushing. They had 2 carries for the team for negative 27 yards. So I guess the last one, that was a nil down at the end of the game. But if you remove Sawyer's sacks or his negative yards, they haven't ran him much, and I want to talk about that in just a second. But they had negative 41 yards on basically 5 carries. If you include the 2 sacks by Sawyer and then the two sack or the 2 kneel down and the bad snap. Baylor rushed, if you take those away, Baylor rushed for 162 yards on 44 carries. And I mean, that's not great. That's not the pace that they were, but that's a really strong day, like against that Houston defense. And I think that goes back to, and kind of supports my opinion, like, stick with it, keep going. And they did late. They got back to it late. I just thought that the numbers don't say that they didn't get away from it. It was just a weird dynamic of the way that game went, the way that it felt like they got away from it. I thought they should have done it more. And then attack vertically as well. But I want to talk about Sawyer and his rushing game. I know that against TCU, he got dinged up a little bit and he was in a walking boot. And it was never made much of a big deal. But the last 2 games, he has 5 carries. I don't know if that's intentional in the terms of trying to keep him healthy, or if it's just intentional of like, we don't really need your feet, especially in the West Virginia game. The way that game got started, he didn't have to run. He didn't need to run. The running game was going with Bryson Washington, Dawson Pendergrass. He was throwing the ball well. I just don't know if they felt like they needed to scheme that in. And I wonder how that comes into play in the last game of the regular season against Kansas, where you're going to probably need more points. I don't know if you're going to need 59 of them like they did against Tech or 49 against West Virginia, but you're going to need more than 20. Kansas defense is not that strong. I just wonder if they're just letting him kind of save those hits, because if they use his legs against Houston, that game could have gone in a little bit different direction. But I think they felt like they were in control and they didn't need to do it. I'm curious to see what happens against Kansas and if What's theory proves out. Maybe he's dinged up and they just don't want to risk it, or maybe they just saved him because they didn't feel like they needed to use his legs.
I've been thinking about this a lot too, Colt, because there were times in this game where he rolled out and instead of running for a few yards or, maybe taking a hit and getting a first down, he's trying to make a throw down the field. And sure, that's great sometimes, but a lot of these throws seem like they're really tough throws. He's kind of more so throwing it as if he catches it, great. If it goes out of bounds, that's fine too. Just don't want to turn it over instead of taking off. And the crazy part is, you watch him early in the year, you watch him at the end of last year against West Virginia, and it's like, yeah, that's not really his game. Like, he wants to tuck it. He wants to go, and he wants to get upfield and get you a big gain. And so I think there is something to that. I wonder, if maybe it's the injuries that they sustained at quarterback that they're, if he goes down, you're probably going to have a true freshman in the game. And, while Nate Bennett has been impressive, he still is a freshman quarterback. And I mean, that's a tough ask for him to go in and win a Big 12 game at this age, in this timeline at Baylor. So I think there's something to that. I think you go into this last game and obviously you're not really going to care about what happens. You got to lay it all out on the line. Like you have to go out there. And
you got a month. You're going to have a month before a bowl game, roughly, after this game. And then you don't want to give.
Yeah, for a Big 12 championship game, though.
True. The odds of that happening. If you have or taking bets on this, I will definitely bet you on this if you want to go that route. But yeah, if they feel like we can't go to Quan Finn, whatever's going on with him, I don't even know. I didn't even remember seeing him on the sideline the last 2 games. Hadn't been really addressed to this point. And if it's Nate Bennett, you absolutely have no reason to run Sawyer Robertson right now. Like you've controlled the last 2 games without having to use his legs. If you go into this game against Kansas and you find, hey, this could be a tight game, because there was multiple times against Houston on basic zone reads where Houston just crashed. And you can tell it's a predetermined read of, we're just handing this ball off. We're not reading anything, because if Sawyer takes it, he's running for 40 yards. They were so aggressive against those plays. And he didn't even attempt it. And he doesn't look unhealthy moving around in the pocket either. Like he doesn't, and so that makes me think that foot, the boot that he had at the TCU game several weeks ago now, I'm not buying that he's hurt. I think it's more of just, let's keep you healthy until we absolutely need you, because once you get up against Houston, I think you feel pretty good, especially the way that game went. You could have pulled that, you could have pulled and said, okay, we got to run you a little bit more now. They never felt like they had to do that. It's coming again at some point, and I guess maybe it's against the Kansas Jayhawks next week.
I think so. And Soar's too good of a runner for you to not utilize it at some point. I do think in these games there was a concerted effort to make sure that he didn't take a bunch of hits. Because I mean, you said he had 5 carries. I mean, he's been sacked 3 times as well. So it's really just 2 carries during that time period as well. That's not like him. Like, if you go look at the previous performances, there's clearly something going on there where they don't want him to take hits. Now, it could be that he's banged up or somewhat injured. I don't necessarily think it's that. I think it's more just that why risk him getting hit in these games? So I think that's an important thing to mention as well, because I do think that changes the offense when he is running the football. I also think in those situations where you're running, the Wildcat with Bryson Washington, most times this year it's been running the Wildcat with Sora Robertson, taking the snap and then running up the middle. We've seen that be dynamic multiple times this season. And so that's definitely something that I have my eye on, and I thought about as well. That's a really good point to bring up, and something that might change going into this matchup against Kansas that they haven't used the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on Kansas, but I think it's rightfully worth discussing what Baylor's looking at, and we'll do our full episode of the preview against Kansas for Baylor against Kansas. But I mean, this is a game. It's you're all in now. I mean, Kansas, and I kind of joke about it, about this being the de facto Big 12 championship. But right now, these are the two best teams. Arizona State can make a case. They did beat Kansas in that stretch. But outside of that, it's Colorado just got beat by Kansas. BYU got beat by Kansas. Baylor has played just as well as anybody. In all those games, talk about the Colorado game that Baylor played against them being a close game, BYU being a close game. Right now, these teams are playing right up there with anybody. And I think you play those games again, and Baylor can go in this game, and you start talking about riding high on momentum. Like, getting to the Big 12 championship game is a kind of a pipe dream right now. But for Baylor, getting to 8 wins against Kansas, then potentially winning 9 games, heading into transfer portal season, recruiting signing days right a week later, you can't overstate how big that momentum will be. I think they have plenty of momentum right now. Don't get me wrong, but you throw in another win, then you get in a little bit bigger of a bowl game for portal season, particularly. This staff has a lot of momentum going on, a lot more to sell, and it's one more thing to sell, that momentum a little bit more against Kansas if you can figure out how to win this game. And I don't want to take away from the 7-4, but 8-4 sounds a little bit better as well.
It does, and 9-4 sounds great. I mean, you get to 9 wins. That's really nice to have on your resume. For Dave Aranda. And it's been one of those things that I think I'd have to go back and look, but I think 7 is the weird number that Baylor, it's been like really bad year or really great year, and then these 7-win type seasons kind of sprinkled in for Baylor over the last, really since Art left, right? Back in, I guess, 2016, they went 7-6. So that was kind of the beginning of this, high highs, low lows, and then just average, just like barely make a bowl game type year.
No
so
in betweens.
So to have, an 8-win or a 9-win season, I think that is a big deal, because it's a different level of consistency that you're trying to get to. And I know last year was really bad. It was a down year, but if Baylor's going to establish this culture of being consistent, you want the consistency to be, an 8-4 type year. Like, that's kind of what you want your low points to be, not these 3-9 type seasons, or, these seasons where it's just like you barely made a bowl game and no one really thinks you're all that good or all that competitive. You just beat the teams you're supposed to, lost to everyone else. You get to 8-4, that completely flips some things in my eyes. And you're right, portal season's right around the corner, and guys are looking for destinations where they can go win football games. And so you got to be able to prove that you can win football games. And Baylor did that this year. And Baylor has a lot with all these transfers that have made an impact. There's a lot to say with that as well. So, it's a big one. Baylor's a 1.5-point favorite going into the game. Baylor's always had trouble getting a lot of attendance for this game. The game, kind of on Thanksgiving weekend. So I'm curious how the crowd does, because I do think that will be important. I also think Kansas fans will actually travel to this game, as there's now bowl.
I have a lot of them in Texas.
Yeah. And so there's a lot going into this game. It's really fascinating. I think, obviously, I'm not going to argue that Baylor is the best team in the Big 12. I think Arizona State has to be able to lay claim to that after they just beat BYU over the weekend. But I do think that Baylor and Kansas are two teams that if you just did eye test and you said the winner of this game was going to be in the Big 12 championship against Arizona State, I'd probably believe you just based on eye test if I didn't know anyone's record. And that's the major intrigue for me going into this game. And crazy part is neither of them are, really even in contention to get to the Big 12 championship. they need a lot. I think Baylor
Yeah.
needs 3 of the 4 teams above them to lose in order for them to have
Yeah.
a chance at making
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And it's the trend of the season type of game. I remember having these discussions 4 weeks ago. We're kind of, where's Kansas going to be going into this game? I mean, they play BYU, they play Iowa State, they play Colorado, and I don't even remember which games. It was kind of like they could be 2-10 or two
Yeah.
and nine at that juncture, and they've turned it around. These two teams are combined 9-1 in their last 10 combined games, and they've played really well. And you talk about Baylor's streak. Kansas streak is extremely impressive because of the teams they've beat where they were in the standings. Baylor's beaten now 3 bowl eligible teams in this streak.
Yep.
You talk about West Virginia, Texas Tech, and what's the third one? TCU and Tech and TCU have a chance to win 8 games now, and then obviously West Virginia could get to 7 depending on their game against Texas Tech. And it was an impressive stretch in that second tier of programs in the Big 12 right now. Kansas's stretch has come against the top of the top. And that was the streak that Baylor went through and lost. That was BYU, Colorado, and Iowa State. That's the 3 teams they just beat. And that makes it, they did lose to Kansas State in there, but it was by 2 points in a game they could have won. Then you'd be talking about 2 teams that are 5-0 in their last 5. But yeah, I mean, I've been thoroughly impressed with Kansas. A lot of it comes down to their offense, playing kind of keep away football. They're still explosive. Their defense isn't that good. They keep people they're really good in the red zone. Once they get into the red zone, they're keeping people from scoring touchdowns, but they give up a ton of explosive plays, a ton of them at a high rate. I mean, you're talking about a rate up there with Oklahoma State, West Virginia, Texas Tech. Like, they give up a ton of them. But they're going to have the opportunity to do it, but it's just who can slow the other one down. And I don't want to say it's going to be a 50-point game because I think they're going to run the football. Both teams are going to run the football to slow the pace of the game down. But it's going to be kind of a potentially who has the ball last game in this game in Waco on Saturday.
Definitely. And just kind of to update where Baylor is at now, they're number 36 in the country in SP plus in the nation, the number 33 offense, number 60 defense, and the 31st special teams unit. Huge strides have been made this year. It's been very impressive. They're behind 5 teams, so they're currently number 6 in the Big 12. I think they could obviously move up a little bit if they're able to beat Kansas. I think they're 1 spot behind TCU, even though they beat TCU. But I think in general, you look at Kansas, and this is the crazy part, but the teams that they've played during this stretch remind you a lot of Kansas. And that's the thing that you have to keep in mind. And it is a thing where you sit there and go, okay, well, can Baylor do it again? But it is one of those things where it's at home. You're facing a team with a really good offense, really scary offense. You feel like they're going to score a lot of points. Yeah. But then on the flip side, they had their defense, according to SP Plus, is number 65 in the nation. And Baylor against teams who have defenses that are ranked that low, they have just crushed. They've absolutely scored a bunch on them. And I think after this performance against Houston, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of work done this week to have a rebound performance. And I think this is a week where they can do it. In the overs at 61.5, I will be taking the over on that. I think this is going to be a very high scoring game, kind of reminiscent probably of Baylor versus TCU, except maybe even more explosive plays. I think there's a chance that this is played in the high 70s. I think these two offenses are just going to be really, really good throughout the game. They have too many playmakers. I think they've seen so much film of each other on defense as well. I think they're going to be able to exploit each other's weaknesses. And so this is just one of those games where it feels like a bit of a coin flip, and who can create more explosive plays, who can be more consistent, who can run the ball better. I think all of that kind of goes into it, which makes this just a great, great final game of the year. I think it's going to be really exciting.
Yeah. So to put it in perspective, Kansas defensively is number 12 in the Big 12 in terms of allowing explosive plays, percentage-wise, plays over 30. Baylor's number 10. Offensively, number 1 and number 2 in creating explosive plays percentage. So you're talking about 2 of the lower end ones of giving them up. 2 of the number 1. Baylor's number 1 at 4.29% of creating plays of 30 over 30 yards. Kansas is number 2 at 4.21%. Baylor has 26 plays of 30 plus yards. Kansas has 22. And they're going to do it. And it's going to be a test for Baylor's defense. If you want to know if they've grown, and now if you watch the Kansas game against Colorado, when Colorado scored, it was because of explosive plays. It was Travis Hunter making big plays, but that's what they've given up all year. You go back to their Iowa State game; they've done it all the entire season of giving up explosive plays defensively. If you get in the red zone against them, it's a struggle to score. They're giving up basically 50% of the time. They're giving up touchdowns, and that's a really good number. And that's where they hang their hat on their defense is, hey, we're going to let you get up and down the field quite often, but once you get in the red zone, you're going to have a tough time scoring against us. So Baylor have its work cut out for us, and we're going to talk about all of this this week quite a bit. I know it's Thanksgiving week. We're having our first preview for Tuesday, where we just kind of break down what Kansas is, and later in the week we'll have the offensive and defensive keys for Baylor and game predictions. So should be a lot of fun to kind of keep you through these holiday, this first holiday week, this first Thanksgiving week of the late fall, early winter. And but any final thoughts on this Baylor game over Houston?
Again, good teams, they find ways to win in unconventional ways and in new and different ways. And it's a sign of a program that is, trending in a good direction to even win like that, even against a team that I think most people would say is bad. You still got to find a way to win these games on the road in Big 12 play. So I'm encouraged. This team keeps winning. They keep finding ways to win. They've completely turned the season around, regardless of what happens the rest of these games. And I think that Baylor fans should be really excited about that and excited for kind of where this program is trying to get to and where it appears to be heading.
Yeah, I know. Absolutely. It's definitely a flip. And like I mentioned to open this episode, 7-4 at this juncture, anybody would have taken that. You don't know how you're getting 7-4. You say, hey, we'll give you 7-4. And that's where they are. And you're very, very pleased with it, knowing you're going to a game at home where you get win number 8. You're pretty thrilled about it. So, all right, Baylor family, that's going to do it for this episode of Inside Baylor Sports. As always, thanks to each of you for listening. Make sure you subscribe to all of your YouTube channels, or all of our YouTube channels, and anywhere you get your podcasts, hop on there and listen to us every single day. Make sure you have a great Monday, and sick 'em Bears.